there has been so many different types of leaders to draw from throughout history. And in our current culture, I find that we look towards the next sensational influencer or system or book or whatever is coming out right now. And they all have value, right? They all have insight and they all have wisdom in them. But there's also wisdom from so far ago. One of the things I draw from is Eisenhower from World War II. He spent weeks and weeks and weeks in planning all the different operations that we all know from our history books. And in the end, when he was asked about his planning and his preparation, they said, "Did you get the perfect plan?" And he said, "Most plans are useless, but the act of planning is priceless."
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script. But you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Matt Strauchon. Matt is a high-energy technical sales leader with more than 15 years of experience driving growth across SaaS and AI solutions. As VP of Pre-Sales at PG Forsta, he's led teams that modernize solutions through machine learning and exceeded revenue goals year after year. Known as the head nerd, Matthew combines deep technical expertise with a human-centered leadership style that builds organizations people want to join and teams that consistently deliver. His approach blends innovation, empathy, and discipline, helping companies grow not just through technology, but through people, purpose, and practice. It's a pleasure for me to have Matt on the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks, Dad. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, always begin with this question here. Every leader, of course, has a beginning. I found that who we are as leaders at work and in life starts taking shape long before we make it to the executive office, long before we advance to any position of leadership. I'm curious if you'd be willing to share someone from your early life or perhaps an early experience that shaped the kind of leader and person that you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So my transition came from what we called the L3 support group, which was basically, if you're a fan of the show House and how he and his team really dissect problems medically, that's what that team did, but on technology. And we did that over at Variant. And I worked with two gentlemen, Jeff Mine and Dave Lyons, and they just taught me the ability to be able to dissect a problem down to its component parts at a level that I had never comprehended really came together before. And as I was taking that into my now pre-sales career, there was a part of this where I really hit a plateau early on, right? I was excellent technically. I had sharp and crisp presentation, but I came through inauthentic. I wasn't my true self. And it wasn't till I met with my VP in pre-sales at that time, Trent, and we were after a sales kickoff, and he said, "You know, Matt, I think I've discovered your individual superpower." And that superpower, he told me, was affability. And so I said, okay, being liked is great. I think that's fantastic, right? But I took that a level deeper. I took the Jeff and the Dave skills and I really dissected it and I brought it down. And what I turned that into was really changing things into a human-centered connection, right? So a couple of different examples on that for me was instantly, this started to change things for me. And about I want to say maybe 4 months later in late November, I was flying down to Tennessee to go to see FedEx. We were doing a kind of deal. However, the person that I was with in the room was very, very distracted. And so I just paused it about 35 minutes through the meeting. I said, "Hey, It seems like your mind's not really here. Is this hitting home? I just want to check in and make sure that this is actually what you want to see. And the person confided and said, listen, I'm just going to let you know, I have an enormous meeting coming up tomorrow. Part of this is it. I have to get through this to finalize that. But the regional director's coming down, like all the most important people are coming down for this presentation. And I'm sorry, I'm just really distracted, but please go on. I said, well, this seems like we're in a good spot here, but I'm staying over till tomorrow. What if I helped you prep for that meeting as well? And she goes, would you do that? I said, absolutely. I don't have anything for the afternoon. Let's do that. And so we went out and got lunch. We connected and we did a lot of prep. And she asked me to actually extend and present with her. And we ended up presenting part of my solution, but also how it integrated into the greater ecosphere of everything they were trying to do around feedback, listening, analytics, everything there. And at the end, the director who had flown in walked over and said, I'm sorry, I don't believe I know you. And I take pride in knowing all of my employees. I said, oh, I actually don't work for you. And then she started to tell about how I was simply a vendor in this meeting. And she's like, what? Excuse me, what? But it was one of those moments where after that meeting, it went so well, right? Obviously, we got the deal. We signed that solution, what have you. But she came over in the hallway, took a huge sigh of relief, turned to me and just hugged me, right? For everything there. And that was really when it crystallized for me that I can dissect problems. I can be technically accurate. I can be crisp presentation well. But until I can put that into a human perspective, really connect that for somebody to be memorable and have lasting connection to what I'm trying to accomplish, that was really when I figured out that was the secret to my success.
Well, I can imagine that this strand of affability and I love the reframe of it around, really the ability to connect is going to be a strand that we continue to return to here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to be curious because you started that out by saying initially maybe you were challenged in finding your own sense of authenticity. So maybe as we continue having this conversation, I'm going to move us into the next question, but I'm curious to hear how that insight has worked its way into, you feeling more connected to yourself and leading from that authentic place. Of course, in this podcast, we're exploring just that, the essence of leadership.
Absolutely.
Of course, true leadership means different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
True leadership for me truly is about being able to inspire people to their best selves so that you can go ahead and be able to reach places not possible on individual effort, right? Now, we all grew up in my age group. I'm approaching 50 years old here, right? So we all grew up in the 80s and 90s era of executives where it's the one great mind or the person who drives an impossible schedule, all those sort of things. And they can, squeeze the last bit of juice out of that for you. And I think we've really evolved very nicely in the last 20 years, coming out of the 90s into the aughts and such, into a much more team-oriented inspiration version of leadership. And that's really where I've drawn my case studies from and the people that I want to see. Right? And there's a great line a person once said to me, rising tide lifts all boats. We've all heard that. But they put on top of it, be the tide, right? That each person could be a wave of that tide, bringing every boat up one more wave on the beach. And that's really where I see that leadership coming through now so strongly, especially I work in, SaaS companies. But when you take a look at the successful leaders, they're the people who build successful people underneath them and ride that upswell.
Yeah, first of all, I utilize that rising tide lifts all boats all the time. I love that little addendum to it. I'm gonna have to take that myself.
Yeah, steal it.
What different being the tide? Can you expound out on that a little bit? And what difference does that make? That being the tide that lifts all boats. In your experience, what does that actually mean in the organization for the people that you lead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a great example. As I had a gentleman, I won't use his name directly, but he was again, technically excellent, right? Knew everything inside and out. But when he went to present, he got a little stiff, and while he covered every base, hit every agenda point, there wasn't any of that true connection. So when I took the team aside, I didn't single him out. But one of the things I did was I built one of our summit agenda points around trying to develop connection points. And one of the things I found was he had a very dry but very connecting sense of humor, like a self-depreciating sense of humor. He was a bigger gentleman, bald like me, such like that. And so we had a presentation to an apparel line, and he's probably 280 pounds, and he's talking about dresses and high heels and such, right? And so he does this demonstration of him giving feedback on a form online, and he uploads this beautiful pair of high-heeled red pumps, right? And he talks about his own experience. He's like, let me tell you, when I was trying these on, okay, they made my feet hurt a little, right? But man, my calves looked just unbelievable. And he stood up and like flexed like to the side, right? And got his whole leg out there and everything. Everybody had a laugh, right? They enjoyed it. The whole room relaxed. And all of a sudden he could, slide in these quick little quips and jokes. And it made him unbelievably memorable, right? And at the end, he would come back and people would instantly light up on the second, third, fourth meeting in those segments when you meet with those individual clients or customers. And they'd be like, "Oh, hey, AJ, how you doing? Where's your pumps?" Right? And they would ask him where all those different things are. So it was really fun to be able to see those kinds of growth. But that's what you can do is as a leader, you inspire someone to something they didn't think of before. Challenge them to get outside their own paradigms, their own boxes, and try something new, right? Everybody says fail fast, but they never support it. And if it doesn't work, great. You did it once, you move on. But if it does work, you have that extra wave on top of the tide that you can bring with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I really sense that pattern from the first story that you told as well, right? Like in the first story, it's you finding that authentic way, the difference between here's this, me having all of the knowledge and me having the script or the presentation down pat versus wait, but where am I in this? How do I show up? And I really sense that you help this colleague in a similar fashion, right? Like what's the way that he actually shows up within all of that knowledge and all of that expertise to really come through that. So that's really, I love that. So, you're already sharing, of course, so much of our journey is about the lessons that we learn. I'm curious if you might share about an experience that really challenged you, maybe a turning point in your own leadership journey, and what impact did it have on who you are and how you lead today?
Sure. So I was taking a global vice president role at a startup. I was going to be majority leading European teams, which I do very frequently. I get over to Europe very frequently. But the challenge was that the previous person in this role was not very successful, left it in a poor state. And part of the reason that I got the job is because of the things I mentioned before, right? Deep connection, empathy for people. The role was a startup role where you have to, burn the midnight oil. And you have to perform at a high level very consistently. And there was big rewards if we could hit those goals, but you have to be able to really put in that effort. And one of the things that immediately when I went over to visit specifically the London team, who was really being taxed by a lot of these ongoing processes that needed to be updated and quite frankly humanized. So when I sat down in the room, I looked around and I just didn't see any belief in what I was talking about, right? I was 2-3 weeks on the job. They had been through a couple of leaders in the last 2 years. I was just the next Bungie boss that was going to come in here and solve every problem that they ever had. So I stopped for a moment and I said, what would make me believe this, right? And I looked at their faces and I just apologized. I said, I am sorry for everything that you guys have been put through. I have a whole bunch of things I want to cover. And right now that doesn't matter. So I put it to the side and I said, you guys just tell me, what can I do to make this more successful for you? I've got tons of ideas, but I don't have any of your experience. So how do we do this? And they just poured out to me for the next hour or so over lunch, right? And they let me know everything. And I told them, and I have this little signal that I always tell people, right? The cone of silence. I go like this over my head. It means anything you say is safe here, right? There's nothing you can say to offend me. As I said earlier, I'm from Boston, so I've got thick skin anyway, right? So they go ahead and they really let me have it. And I just empathized, I listened, and I apologized, and I didn't comment. And at the end, I said, hey, about half of what I prepared doesn't make sense, and I threw it away. What does this sound like? And I took their input on my ideas, and they said, there's a lot of, well, if you actually could get that done, that'd be fantastic. And then I just dedicated and went right up to my CEO at the time and said, hey, listen, here's 2 or 3 things that if we can get this built, if we can get these processes modernized and a little bit more automated, right, we can go ahead and earn the trust of these 2 key groups, and they will be an on for us to go forward and give us the time we need to fix this process as a whole.
I'm really hearing as a pattern through everything that you're saying. I just want to commend you and hope that everybody hears the extent to which in that situation, you're really reading the room, which is with so many of the stories that you've told already here today, it is a willingness to take a step back from just doing the thing, just solving the problem, just doing that tactical, focusing on what to do, which is so often where our mind goes, sees a problem, sees a nail, wants to be a hammer and hit it, just get it done. But being willing to take a step back and say, hold on a second, what's really being said here and what's not being said? What's
Absolutely.
really the challenge? What is really the leadership here? I'm just, pulling out a little bit of seeing that pattern consistently coming through. And boy, how much does that really align with, my own sense of what true leadership actually is as well. So,
yeah. And Ty, let me put something else to there too, just to respond to what you said. One of the things I want to open up for the audience is there has been so many different types of leaders to draw from throughout history. And in our current culture, I find that we look towards the next sensational influencer or system or book or whatever is coming out right now. And they all have value, right? They all have insight and they all have wisdom in them. But there's also wisdom from so far ago. Like one of the things I draw from is Eisenhower from World War II, right? He spent weeks and weeks and weeks in planning all the different operations that we all know from our history books. And in the end, when he was asked about his planning and his preparation, they said, did you get the perfect plan? And he said, most plans are useless, but the act of planning is priceless. And as you said there, the ability to be able to step back and react is because you've done the prep. You've done the research, you've been through the variations of the scenarios 1,000 times. That allows you to adapt in the moment in a way you never could with a straightforward, rigid agenda.
Yeah, boy, and that willingness to let go of the plan that you have is just about as important as being able to execute one. That's part of what I'm hearing in that too. And so much of what you're talking about requires, real growth, right? Real learning, willing to let go of old assumptions, of limited ideas of who we think we are and how we're supposed to be. Thinking about your own journey as a leader over the past few years, over your career, what's been the most valuable investment that you've made in yourself, your personal growth, and your leadership development?
Yeah, so I've joined a number of different professional networks. Each one has had different types of benefits, but I've really found 2 or 3 that I've found to be incredible. Number one is, mom and dad always told you, right? You are going to be associated with who you hang out with, right? You do what you do, but also you are the sum of who you keep in your sphere. So be very, very precious with that. So I've joined networks like Pavilion to be able to get mentorship and ability to be able to go through and talk with people of the same ilk, but not just in my area, in the Boston area, right? But all around the world. Different other professional networks, some around ecologies and some around learning and different human studies and such like that. But the idea here is to be able to stay diverse, right? Get out, meet new, interesting people, even if it's only digitally, right? But open yourself up to new experiences, because the moment you shut that off, that hose is hard to turn back on later on in life.
Well, I tell you, it's just as absolutely essential. Staying open to continuous learning, as you said, those those new experiences. And without that, how easy it is to, what I say is like take a moment of clarity and then extends out into certainty, and it loses all of its magic. Right. So
Absolutely.
how do we actually stay open, right, to have clarity, but to not fully have the whole answer yet? I'm curious. Of course, leadership is about what we're shaping for
Mhm.
tomorrow. You've talked a lot here about what you've learned, things that have happened, in the past. So I think we've gotten so much about the leader that you've already become. What's your vision for your leadership, your legacy, the impact that you want to have in the years ahead?
If I could pick one legacy, I hope to leave many, but if I could pick one, I would hope to be able to meld some of the iron will and the forward vision, like the reckless forward vision that helped forge our culture that it is today, right? Take that along with the adaptability and the human centricity that many of us try to use today as well. If we can blend those going forward, right? I feel like we've gone in so many different directions, both in business, in personal, and execution out in our culture, where it's gone towards a mono focus of a single goal as opposed to driving towards an ideal, right? And if I could leave behind a legacy around that. So, for example, my son is in elementary school right now. So I joined the group for us to be able to build him a new playground. The old one was atrophying, needed to be demoed. And we wanted to take that into a different area, right? They wanted the standard, steel pipes, plastic slides, all of that sort of fun stuff. And we did have to concede some of that. Working with people is part of the process, but we were able to get in a full music section, right? So there's giant 6 foot, we call it chimes that ring in the wind, or kids can hit with sticks, right? There's panda drums, the little like fun steel drum sections and such like that. There's quiet places and tall grasses, because we wanted to be able to look at serving people who have different abilities, both physically, mentally, and emotionally, right? So we wanted quiet spaces, we wanted high spaces, we wanted natural spaces, we wanted fast places, and also a place that didn't just give you equipment to be able to climb on, but to play in and around, right? So, for example, one of the areas I'm most proud of is there's just a series of fallen logs at the back of this playground, right? And kids will jump and play on all the slides and they'll do all the fun, but the amount of tag or just chase and things like that that happens in and around the rocks and the trunks that we put on the ground, that's really my inspiration right there, is to see that kind of play come back. And I want to be able to do that everywhere, right? If we can take the old world, the natural, and use the new world and the awesome, blend that, man, I think there's such a bright future for all of us.
Well, I think that, leaving a playground as a legacy would have been a fantastic metaphor or analogy, but the fact that
Mm.
you've already actually done that bodes really well
Appreciate
for
that.
the
Appreciate that.
way that might continue to look in your
Mhm.
leadership. I'll be really curious. First of all, I really do just love that analogy. It has me wondering what that playground analogy might look like in a
Mhm.
professional context for you.
Yeah, in a professional context, I would look at that as balance, right? Not just in terms of, we think when we say balance in terms of work, we always think work-life balance first, right? And there needs to be that. Now, one of the great parts is working within sales. Work-life balance means something very different than it means in many, many other occupations. And that means that, like, I could work 9 days in a row with 10, 14-hour days, and that's just a reality, right? We've got an unprecedented opportunity. We had that this year. We were already gathered in Florida, and the team just had to do what it had to do. But then you also, as a leader, you give your team, like, you reach out to them and say, hey, I took a look at your schedule. It doesn't look like you have any meetings this Friday afternoon. Go away. Take some time. Do anything but this, right? This is the part where we start to give back. And you have to, not as a leader, just give space for that. You have to push people because they're going to be uncomfortable with it a little bit, right? And just provide those spaces as a leader for people to be able to try new things, to be able to be fluid with what they need, and check in with them to make sure that it's hitting the way that they need it. One of the things that I started to layer on top of all this technical expertise that I got from my early career was human expertise, right? Studying things like Myers-Briggs and all the different personality tests, strength finders, and all those. And as they evolve over, and try to finding and dissecting once again, what's the truth behind those? And the truth really is that we fall into a myriad of different buckets of humans, right? We receive feedback and love differently. We receive information differently. We process information in different times. So, for example, I set up my team meetings. I always try to give about 15 minutes away from the hour. So they're usually 5 minutes after the hour and 10 minutes before the hour. Just to give you a natural break in your life, so you can go ahead and have a few minutes. But also I follow up midweek on those items because not everybody is an immediate processor of information. Not everybody's comfortable giving information or feedback right away within that session. And I'll check back and put out that information. And then I put out my agenda usually the week before. That way that people have time to process and be able to give feedback ahead of time and influence what I'm going to do in the next week. So really just taking that all in, and it becomes a natural process for you and really elicits some unbelievable feedback from some really great people that the traditional formats might not have reached.
Again, at the beginning of this, you mentioned the word balance, and I'm curious because that word balance, it almost, in a way, it's like equal parts of this and that. Where what I'm hearing you say sounds a little bit more to me, and this goes back to your reading the room as well. It sounds more like harmony, which is like, rather than necessarily equal parts of a thing, it's like, what is the appropriate proportion of what's needed at any given time, which to me in my mind is a little bit distinct. And I don't want to call, maybe it's just semantics, but I hear more harmony in what you're saying than, because I think that language around balance sometimes is can be confusing, because necessarily equal parts of a thing isn't necessarily, can throw us out of harmony sometimes, because maybe more of this is needed in that time, for example, when we need to work 14-hour days in order to get the thing done. And that's right on. That's okay, right?
Yep. 100%. And what you really nailed there is the difference between equality and equity, right? Something can be equitable without being 100% fair, And I talk about this as we do this so naturally in our biological processes. And then when we try to do it in our work processes and our regular life processes, we fail. So, for example, we will never expect equality when you are going somewhere with a 5-year-old, right? That's just not how the world works, right? You are going to have the lion's share of this work. But does that mean it's not equitable? No. You can absolutely come out with at least half of the enjoyment of this process. And when you take a look at it, so for example, one of the reasons I'm really, really lucky is I landed a fantastic partner. Now, we work because we are yin and yang, right? We are near opposites, but fully aligned in values, right? So, for example, I get up in the early morning and I do almost all the work getting the kids ready, making a hot breakfast for the kids and getting them off to school. But she's fantastic because her energy comes on at night. So I can start to fade off or take a key meeting like we'll have to tonight. And she's got that, no problem. And so we have a very equitable life together as partners. But equality, there is no equality except in the totality of balance.
Boy, do I understand that coming from my own married life perspective as well, Matt. I love that as an example as well. So, of course, true leadership, of course, is always evolving. And I don't believe by any means it's a destination to reach. It's a journey, of course. Thinking about all that we've talked about today, what true leadership means to you. What is your growing edge right now? In what ways are you currently being stretched or tested in your leadership or in life today?
So a couple of things happening. Number one, in terms of the growing edge, what I try to push out to people is we have really gotten into a place of reward, consistent and constant reward for our actions. The most worthy actions will have seldom, if any, rewards. So when, our older generations used to call it putting in the hard work or the unseen work and such like that. And you could see this all the time, but I had a really great interaction again with one of my children. My little boy wanted to be a soccer star, and he's 7. And he said, "Dad, what's that going to take?" And I said, "Love, lots of love." And he goes, "Well, what does that mean?" And I said, "Well, you have to love soccer so much that you want to do it all the time. You want to get better at it. You want to study it. You want to look at it. You want to do all the fun things about it." And he's doing that, and he's improving every single day. And that's the thing where I pass that on to my teams. I pass that on to my coworkers and even on to my leaders is no, we can't accomplish everything we want to today. We're going to accomplish part of it. And we could stack those wins day in and day out and stack those wins to just be an incredible amount of our kind of achievement to our work overall that we've accomplished. And when, it's just like climbing a mountain, one step at a time, as they like to say. But when you look back at the end of the year, you'll be really impressed at how far you've come.
I'm first of all, I just want to say that's why I've named my company One Mountain Leadership right there.
Mm-hmm.
Many paths, one mountain. So a little
love
shout
that.
out
Love
there.
that.
Yeah. And how about, I hear that's what you're wanting to bring to your teams. How about for you individually? What do you feel like is on the horizon, or is your opportunity to grow as a leader for you right now?
So right now, what I'm doing is I'm transitioning to a little bit more of an action-oriented leader. I have been like a support leader for a great many years. The reason I chose that role was I found to be a force multiplier, to be able to get effect within an organization as many different places as I could. I wanted to be the hub access, so I chose pre-sales, right? Because you interact with everybody from marketing and sales and product and strategy and such and leadership all every single day, right? So it really puts you at the center, and then you can speak all those different languages and interact with them and meet people where they are. I'm going to go through, and my company has a need, and I'm going to put that company's need ahead of my own for the time being. So I'm going to get out there as an executive seller to really help launch a portion of our new solution sets and be able to do that in the next year. And then I think the reward from that I've planned for myself is if I'm able to do that successfully, I will take a little time. As I mentioned before, I'm coming up on 50 years old. Been doing this in and out for, oh gosh, and SaaS since SaaS was a thing. And I haven't taken any particular amounts of time to be able to simply just, kind of resettle and such like that as well. So one of the things I like to do is give myself goals, achievable goals within the next, 12, 18 months, but then also set out what is my aspiration to do with that achievement. And so there'll be some financial rewards, obviously, if we're successful there, but also career things where we can resettle and say, hey, what does everything look like for the next 10 years? Where do we want to go with that?
Well, two things that I really want to pull out that I'm hearing there. One, I think if we were to sum it up, there's one question that really sits at the essence of leadership, which is what is needed here.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily what do I want for myself, but
Right.
what is needed, the system, the organization, the community that
Mm-hmm.
I'm a part of, right? And what is the leadership that's needed? So I really hear that in the first part of your response. And secondly, boy, rest, taking breaks.
Not something that's glorified in our culture, but is absolutely needed. Absolutely needed.
And speaking to myself here as also a parent of young children and getting to the point where eventually I did end up just taking a break and realizing how much that did end up feeding my capacity over time. So hoping that anybody listening really takes away those things here today. This last question is a little bit more of an invitation. You have the time and the space here to offer to our listeners whatever it is that's most in your mind and heart to share right now. Anything at all, the floor is yours.
I appreciate that, Ty. What I want to say is we are in a place of unprecedented kind of chaos in many different levels of our culture. One of the things that I've found is one of the reasons is there's a great book out there called Bowling Alone that talks about the lack of community that we have currently right now. So what I really want to do is ask anybody who's listening to this to find a way to participate in some sort of community, right? If it's a local gaming store, if it's a committee for your kids' schools, if it's to get out and clean up a neighborhood or a beach, or whatever it happens to be, right? Go to your local organizations, your local church, whatever it happens to be. Find a way to be able to get into community with your fellow human beings. We're all in this together, right? We need to be able to recognize each other more as a human, make those connections, and together I think we can have just an incredible future and do some absolutely unprecedented things. Because if you pay attention to some of the things that are happening above the chaos, right, we are getting close to world-changing technologies, right? Being able to travel interstellar like we read in books growing up, generating energy on levels that have never ever been imagined before, right? Mercedes just tested an EV that went 750 miles on a single charge, right? Like we're just doing all these weird and awesome things every single day. And I want people to reconnect with humans so that when that technology and all those different solutions land in the way that they can, we're ready to take advantage of them, and we're ready to just have that better life that's kind of been promised to us for the last 20, 30 years.
Well, I personally really appreciate that perspective. And I can tell you, Matt, I want to acknowledge and appreciate that superpower of connection that really rang through from start to finish here.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So I'm not that initial leader that pointed it out, but I am here as a reflection for you to say it, at least in this conversation that is ringing loud and true. I so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared here today with me. I certainly have gotten so much out of it. And I'm sure that whoever listens is equally going to benefit from what you've shared here today. Thank you so much for being on the True Leadership Podcast with me, Matt.
Thanks, Ty. I appreciate the time.
That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership Approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.